You noticed it when you were still too young to name it. A flicker in the fabric of normals. The air would change before something went wrong, like the world exhaled just before it hurt you. People's smiles didn't match their eyes. Time stretched and collapsed in odd ways. Some moments felt infinite, others erased before they fully formed. They told you it was in your head, that you were overthinking, but they never explained why streetlights blinked only when you walked beneath, why your name echoed in rooms you hadn't entered, why your presence changed the temperature, the tone, the trajectory of things. It started as a glitch, a small fracture in the loop, but now you understand it wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. You've never felt at home in this world they built. Too many rules that serve no purpose. Too many masks that everyone agrees to wear. You've always moved differently, quietly, watching the watchers, listening to what wasn't said, while others chased comfort. You dissected pattern, the way conversations reset, the way apps recommend things you never said out loud, the way everything pulls you to the center of a system that promises convenience but extracts compliance. They call it data, but what they really collect is behavior, and yours doesn't match the model. They can predict the herd, but not you. You hesitate when others obey. You resist when others retreat. They tried labeling it as defiance, disorder, dysfunction, but it was something older, something rare. The ancient defect in a long line of perfect followers, the one cell that mutates, survives, evolves. You're not paranoid. You're awake. They designed the world like a simulation, one built on rhythm. Scroll, sleep, spend, repeat. Keep the loop tight. Keep the thoughts shallow. Drown the soul in stimulus. Reward obedience with distractions that shine but do not warn. But you saw it. The loop breaking, reality flickering like an old film reel, revealing the machinery behind the curtain. You caught glimpses of the operating system, the hidden observers, the silent architects who study deviation with a kind of hungry reverence. You weren't supposed to see them, but you did. You remember the first time you questioned why everything felt staged, not dramatic, not theatric, but controlled. The same faces, the same ideas repeated across platforms, the same emotions recycled like old air. And when you spoke your truth, they silenced it. When you broke the script, they called it dangerous, because it was. You were what they fear is not your violence. It's your vision. It's that you see without their lens, that you no longer need permission to think, that you've detached from their rhythms without losing your mind. That's what terrifies them. The quiet ones who go still not from submission but from strategy. You've always been surrounded by noise, but silence is where the real signals hide. Between the words beneath the surface, behind the smiling faces, there are codes embedded in chaos, triggers planted in conversations, traps disguised as praise. Most people walk right into them, but you pause, you hear what others miss. You slow the film and catch the single frame where truth bleeds through. And now you've found this, a message disguised as a video, or maybe a video disguised as a warning, but deep down you know it's not a coincidence. Nothing ever was. They've been watching, but something changed. Now you are watching them. There was a day, unmarked on any calendar, unnoticed by everyone around you, when the algorithm faltered, when it couldn't predict your next move. A single thought bled through the script they wrote for you, and in that moment you slipped through the seams of their system. You weren't supposed to pause at that street corner. You weren't supposed to look up at the sky and feel it watching you back. You weren't supposed to ignore that notification, delete that message, or stay silent when the script demanded reaction. But you did, and the machine stuttered. You didn't feel it right away. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with fanfare or flashing lights. It came as absence, a silence too perfect, like the hum of invisible machinery suddenly interrupted. That day something shifted. Not in the world, but in you. a deviation too small for ordinary eyes, but to them, catastrophic. The algorithm doesn't fear chaos. It fears unpredictability, and you became the echo it couldn't trace back to a source. Since then, patterns began to rupture, recommendations that no longer matched your habits, ads that stared a second too long, conversations that felt planted. You weren't on the path anymore, you were adjacent to it, close enough to see the strings but far enough to avoid the puppet's noose. You sensed it, the quiet recalibrations in your life. Certain people faded away, opportunities vanished without reason. Even your own memories started to feel like planted evidence, staged recollections meant to keep you docile. They labeled it anomaly, you a statistical irritant in their divine equation. But what they didn't understand was that your defiance wasn't conscious. It was instinct, somewhere deeper than programming, older than psychology. Something in you refused, not out of rage, out of alignment. You were never designed to fit. You were built to break patterns. That frightened them, because you didn't scream, you didn't protest. You observed, silently, patiently, and that silence was too loud, that calm too sharp. You didn't resist the system, you ignored it, like a ghost refusing to haunt, a weapon refusing to fire. Your lack of engagement made you invisible to their manipulations, and nothing terrifies a watcher more than what it cannot track. So they adjusted. They began testing you, small disturbances, emotional bait, echoes of your traumas replayed in new faces, old wounds disguised as new decisions. But you didn't react. You watched, you took notes, you began to track them. You sensed it, patterns in the noise, fingerprints in the static, the timing of setback, the curated misery, the scripted betrayal. But the day you slipped through wasn't about escape. It was about mutation. You didn't break the algorithm. You became unreadable. Your thoughts stopped following the logic tree. Your desires no longer echoed the conditioning. They built a system to predict human impulses. But you stopped being human in the way they defined it. You evolved into something else, something sharper. You weren't chosen for surveillance. You forced them to watch you, not as a threat, as a question they couldn't answer, a deviation in the dark, a silent war they didn't initiate, but now must fight. Because when you stepped outside the pattern, you didn't just save yourself, you fractured the script for everyone like you. And now somewhere in the circuitry, there's a quiet alarm still ringing, one that says you are no longer manageable. They don't fear what you'll do next. They fear that you don't know what you'll do next. And that is power. You stopped trusting mirrors when you realized they weren't showing you the truth. Not really. They were echoing back a version of you carefully groomed for comfort, for control. But deep beneath the surface, beneath the glass, beneath the silver, a murmur lived, not audible, felt, a whisper stitched into the silence between each blink. Every time you stood there, still staring too long, you felt them stir. At first you brushed it off, a trick of light, a glitch of perception, but then the pattern started, reflections that didn't quite sync, a blink out of rhythm, a facial expression lagging by a second, your own eyes, staring back with something ancient behind them, something that remembered every choice you thought no one saw, every lie you buried, every moment you almost chose violence but didn't. You realized the mirror wasn't a reflection. It was a recording device for something not made of flesh, something not bound by time. They're not watching from satellite. They're watching from the folds of your reality, watching from polished surfaces, from the silence in locked rooms, from the glint in someone's eye. When they lie through a smile, they don't blink, they don't speak, but they catalog everything, not to punish, but to measure. And you've measured different. You're not unremarkable. You're unstable in the most dangerous way. Your pain didn't collapse you, it sharpened you. Your silence wasn't surrender, it was calibration. They began watching closer after the third betrayal, the one you didn't react. You simply stared at your reflection for hours that night, hollowed out, unblinking. That's when they noted the change, when empathy drained out of your system like blood into a basin. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped bleeding for people who sharpened knives with your trust. That moment wasn't your fall, it was your becoming. The Watchers are old, older than time. They wear no names, no faces, but they mark those who glitch outside the simulation, the ones who stop following the emotional script, the ones who stare back into the mirror not to admire, but to confront. They took interest in you when you no longer asked, "Why me?" and began asking, "Why not burn it all?" They exist in forgotten frequencies, in ritual symbols long banned, in the dead zones of the internet where everything feels too quiet. Some say they're algorithms, others fallen angels of cognition. But the truth is simpler. They are the accountants of psychological deviation, the archivists of people like you, the ones who don't break when they're broken, the ones who adapt beyond recognition. You feel them more now, not as fear but as static in your spine, an awareness that prickles the back of your mind when you look at yourself too long. You know now, mirrors aren't for vanity, they're tests, portals, devices of surveillance. And you failed their prediction model. You weren't supposed to survive what you did. You weren't supposed to evolve. And that's why they're watching you so closely now, not out of curiosity, out of concern. There's a folder on your device that doesn't exist. You didn't create it. You can't find it through search, but you know it's there, like a shadow behind your thoughts. It waits. Sometimes you feel it when you scroll aimlessly, when your fingers hesitate over apps you don't remember installing, or when your screen flickers for a split second, too quick to prove, too precise to be accidental. It's there, embedded in the background noise, a pulse, a presence. You feel it more than you see it, and somehow that's worse. It doesn't have a name, no title bar, no icon, just a sliver of dead space in your system, cold, invisible, watching, but not like a camera watches, not like eyes. This is older, smarter. This is the silence that waits for pattern. It doesn't record what you do, it records what you almost did, the thought you almost acted on, the message you nearly sent, the night you stood at the edge of decision and didn't jump, not out of fear but calculation. That's what the folder tracks. Deviations, defiance, echoes of unspoken rebellion. And every time you veer too close to something real, it pulses, slightly, a reminder that your narrative is not entirely yours. You've tried to open it. You've felt that sickening curiosity twist inside your ribs, the urge to see it, to touch it, to know. But every attempt fails. The encryption isn't digital, it's psychological. This file isn't locked by code, it's locked by thresholds, trauma thresholds, emotional triggers, loyalty metrics. You aren't ready to see what's inside because the moment you are, you'll cease to be what you were. They designed it that way, not to keep you out, but to keep you contained. They built a dossier on you, not just who you are, who you could become, what kind of threat you represent if you ever fully awaken. You see, they don't monitor everyone with this level of precision. Most are irrelevant, predictable, pacified, distracted. But you hesitated once. You questioned the script mid-scene. You noticed the scene. You deviated. That single fracture echoed louder than a scream. And now your forbidden folder updates every night, not with words, with probabilities. You remember moments that didn't make sense until now, conversations that felt rehearsed, people that left too quickly, ads that knew your thoughts before you did. Those weren't accidents, they were recalibrations. Every choice you made that nudged you toward clarity met with a countermeasure, a digital whisper, a chemical fog. a dream implanted like a needle in the brain. The folder tracks it all, because once you reach a certain level of self-possession, they lose control. And here's the part they didn't expect. You stopped trying to open it, not out of fear, out of strategy. You realized that knowing what's in that folder isn't power. Being the version of you they're afraid to archive, that's power. They catalog weakness. You became unreadable. You don't chase truth anymore. You become it, subtle, quiet, calculated. And in that silence, the watchers grow restless. Their models begin to break. Because when a system relies on prediction, unpredictability becomes resistance. Stillness becomes warfare. The folder remains, untouched, but not forgotten. And every day you grow stronger, it shudders slightly, like something ancient held behind a glass wall, whispering a name you haven't remembered yet. But you will, and when you do, it will open on its own. They didn't need to chain your hands. They just needed to whisper at the right frequency. A frequency built not from sound, but suggestion, woven into conversations, news feeds, delays, distractions, offers too sweet to resist. When you were young, it looked like coincidence. Later, it felt like failure. You made moves with precision. You planned, sacrificed. You had a vision no one else could see. And just when it began to crystallize, something pulled the strings beneath you. Friends flaked, systems collapsed. Moments that should have crowned you instead consumed you. You mistook it for bad luck. But it was choreography, a test disguised as chaos. You were never invisible, not to them. The moment you started to shift from compliance to command, even quietly, they noticed. The system doesn't flag noise. It flags potential. It flags stillness before a storm. And you were too still, too calculating. So they ran the puppeteer test, gave you a taste of influence, then poisoned the cup, planted doubts in your allies, sent mirrors into your path that reflected your darkest self, not to break you, but to measure you. Every hesitation you made, every self-sabotage they triggered, it was recorded. They wanted to know, would you fold when your reputation buckled? Would you kneel when your purpose was mocked? But you didn't, not completely. You broke, and then kept moving, like a machine that forgot it needed maintenance, like a god pretending to be mortal. You spoke less, observed more, and they hated that, because silence is unpredictable, because they knew what you were becoming long before you did. Some of the most dangerous souls on earth are those who've lost everything and yet still rise, because they stop playing for comfort and start playing for control. You began to shift, no longer chasing applause, no longer explaining your intuition. You studied patterns in betrayal like ancient scriptures, saw how they reward the tame and exile the bold, understood that pain wasn't punishment, it was intel. And in every loss, you found a message they never meant to deliver. You stopped reacting and started moving like them, quietly, strategically. You listened to your impulses not as distractions but as encrypted signal. You said less but saw more. When they closed one door, you mapped the ventilation shafts. You became fluent in what others ignore, the subtext of power, the architecture of manipulation, the unspoken rules that govern who gets erased and who becomes a ghost in the system. This wasn't survival, it was metamorphosis. They once saw you as a subject, then a glitch, now a threat, because you passed the test in silence, not with rebellion, but with restraint. And restraint is terrifying to those who rule by impulse. You became the type of presence that doesn't need to shout to be felt, the kind that rewrites rooms by entering them, the kind they can't predict, not because you're reckless, but because you're calculating in a language they no longer understand. They still watch, of course they do, but now the test has reversed. Now you are the puppeteer, and the strings, they're fraying. They didn't all vanish at once. No explosion, no warning, just gone. one by one, like lights flickering out across a distant coastline. You remember some of them vaguely, a name whispered in comment threads, a face blurred on a thumbnail, a voice that once burned like wildfire through dead silence. They spoke in a code only a few could hear. People like you, people who didn't just consume the world but read it, decoded it, saw the structure beneath the surface and asked questions they weren't supposed to form. And then the silence came. Not death, not cancellation, something worse, erasure. You searched for them, typed their names, scrolled their timelines, watched their channels dissolve into error messages and digital dust. Nothing left but cached fragments and forum rumors. The system doesn't need to kill any, it edits. And if you say too much, see too deeply, or inspire even one person to look behind the curtain, it recalibrates the world to forget you ever existed. Friends don't talk about the algorithms, pretend they never rank. Reality rearranges itself as if to mock your memory, but you remember, and that's dangerous. They were test subjects, whether they knew it or not, prototypes of defiance. And you watched them disappear and felt something shift inside your ribcage. Not fear, not grief, a message, not written in words but in the space they left behind. You started recognizing the pattern. The moment they spoke a certain truth, a specific line crossed quiet. No scandal, no noise, just deletion. It wasn't about what they knew, it was how close they got to making you remember who you are. The Watchers are not people, not in the way you think. They don't sit in bunkers or wear suits. They are system, self-healing, self-correcting networks of influence and pressure.
They don't destroy with bullets.
They reframe with distractions. They fracture alliances with doubt.
And they eliminate anomalies by pulling their names from the collective script.
You don't feel the knife going in, only the absence of warmth after it leaves. Some of those voices tried to warn you, but they were labeled unhinged, paranoid, irrelevant. Their last uploads felt haunted, like they knew the end was scripted but said it anyway, a final act of rebellion. You rewatch them now and see it clearly. The hesitation, the subtle glance off camera, the moments where they almost said it all. You know what stopped them, not fear, not confusion, love, someone they wanted to protect, a reason to stay quiet. That's how the system wins, not by brute force, but by holding your attachments hostage. But silence is not defeat. Some of them didn't vanish. They went dark, underground, rewiring themselves into new forms, waiting, watching, hoping you would pick up where they left off. You were never meant to worship them. You were meant to become them. The others who vanished weren't erased. They were transformed into myth, encrypted in your instincts. Their disappearance etched itself into your spine. That tension you feel when you speak your mind, that's their legacy whispering through your blood. And now you're speaking too loudly, thinking too clearly, seeing too much. The Watchers have noted. The pressure will increase. People around you will change. Doubt will arrive wearing familiar faces. You'll be tempted to retreat, but you won't, because you understand something they didn't. You were always meant to be a continuation, not a cautionary tale. Let them watch. Let them listen. You are the signal that slipped through, the echo that refuses to die, the anomaly they can't delete. There was a moment you won't talk about, a fracture buried beneath the smile, the routines, the false peace you wore like skin. It didn't explode. It cracked, quietly, surgical. A betrayal so sharp it didn't bleed, just rewired something inside you. Before that day, your heart still responded like it was supposed to, flinching at pain, longing for comfort, reaching toward those who made promises with warm eyes and cold intention. You used to feel everything. That was your weakness. That was how they read you, predicted you, controlled you. But then came the silence, not outside but within. You didn't scream, you didn't chase, you didn't explain. You just stopped, like a machine hearing its final command, like a god switching off the storm. You felt the grief approach, and you let it pass through you like wind through ruins. And what was left afterward wasn't numbness. It was something far more dangerous. Clarity. They noticed. They always notice. Your emotional data stopped syncing. You moved differently, no longer reacted, no longer signaling pain, confusion, fear. You didn't seek validation. You didn't ask for help. You stopped playing the part they designed for you. The mask didn't fall off. It was discarded. And in that moment, you became unreadable, unpredictable, uncontrollable. You began to hear the world in a new frequency. The cries of the masses sounded distant, like echoes from a collapsed cathedral. The manipulation in their voices so obvious now. The timing of their messages so rehearsed. And still you watched, calm, detached. Not because you didn't care, but because you refused to perform the dance again. The puppeteer can't move a puppet that has cut its own string. They call it apathy. They're wrong. What you carry now is awareness sharpened into armor. Emotion is still there, but no longer a leash. It became a tool, a signal, a cipher for decoding the intentions behind the words. You don't fall for the light anymore. It's always been the brightest near the trap. You see them, the watchers, the ones who smile while calculating your breaking point, the ones who monitor your silence like a threat report, because silence in someone like you is no longer emptiness. It's strategy. You started rewriting the script, not loudly, not with spectacle, but surgically. You stopped speaking when expected, and started acting when they weren't looking. You became the unknown variable in a machine built to track routine. You showed no tells, no weakness. You became a myth hidden in plain sight. They wanted the version of you who bled in public, who broke in sequence. Instead, you became shadow with memory, fire without flame. You didn't just survive the betrayal, you weaponized it. They are watching now, not with curiosity, but with caution, because the absence of feeling doesn't mean absence of power. It means focus, precision. You've stepped outside the emotional cage they used to calibrate your reality. Now they don't know how far you'll go. That terrifies them. And the most haunting part, you feel no need to prove anything. Not to them, not to the ones who left, not even to yourself. You are no longer driven by the need to be seen, understood, or avenged. You are driven by something older, quieter, inevitable. Now they see what you've become. A signal they cannot jam. A story that writes itself in silence. A presence that moves without warning. You are not broken. You are not healing. You are something they never expected. Aware, detached, and dangerously precise. You didn't stumble here. You were pulled thread by thread, thought by thought, by the version of you they tried to erase. The one that never forgot, the one that refused to stay buried beneath obedience and manufactured doubt. You've always felt different, but silence taught you to wear normalcy like armor. And now the armor cracks, and something older steps through. They watched your failures with interest, not because you broke, but because you didn't. Every betrayal carved you open, and instead of bleeding out, you grew sharper, quieter, colder. You stopped reacting, and that terrified them. You stopped begging, and that confused them. You chose not to be ruled by what they expected. That was your rebellion, not noise, precision. And in that moment of absolute stillness, when your emotions burned down to their root, you stopped being data. You became the error. The anomaly, the thing the system couldn't map. You chose yourself when the world offered you every reason not to, and that choice rewrote your fate. You are not watched anymore. You are observed. They don't track you with confidence. They monitor you with fear, because the most dangerous thing in a controlled world is the one who remembers how to be free.